Years later, Vanessa would often lie awake at night thinking about one question. If she could go back in time, would she still choose Kingsley? Some days the answer was yes, other days it was no. Because the man she once believed was her greatest victory eventually became her greatest regret. But years earlier, none of that mattered. Back then, all Vanessa could see was a life she desperately wanted, a life that belonged to her best friend. Kingsley was young, handsome, successful, and incredibly wealthy, the kind of man who attracted attention the moment he entered a room. When Sandra started dating him, her life changed completely. The expensive gifts, the beautiful mansion, the attention, the admiration. To anyone watching from the outside, Sandra looked like the luckiest woman alive. Vanessa smiled whenever Sandra talked about Kingsley. She laughed with her, celebrated with her, and acted happy for her. But deep down, something else was growing. Every gift, every compliment, every story Sandra shared about Kingsley made Vanessa ask herself the same question. Why Sandra? Why did she get everything? The more Vanessa watched, the harder it became to ignore the feeling. Then there was Jason, Kingsley's best friend. The two men were inseparable. Wherever Kingsley went, Jason was usually there too. Sandra often joked that Jason spent more time with Kingsley than anyone else. Everyone laughed. Nobody thought much about it. Looking back years later, Vanessa would realize the signs had been there from the very beginning. But by then, it was already too late. Unlike Vanessa, Sandra wasn't interested in Kingsley because of his wealth. She genuinely loved him. But there was one issue they could never agree on. Sandra believed intimacy should wait until marriage. It was a promise she had made to herself long before meeting Kingsley. At first, Kingsley respected her decision, but as the months passed, his patience slowly began to disappear. Every visit ended with the same disagreement. Kingsley wanted more. Sandra refused. Sometimes they argued for hours. Other times, Sandra left his house in tears. She loved him, but she refused to abandon her values. To avoid unnecessary tension, Sandra rarely visited Kingsley alone. Sometimes she brought Vanessa. Other times she came with another friend. Whenever Sandra visited, Jason was often there too, watching television, talking business, or simply spending time with Kingsley. One evening, after another disagreement, Kingsley looked directly at Sandra. Sandra, stop bringing your friends to my house. Sandra laughed. Why? Kingsley shook his head. One day you're going to regret it. Sandra ignored the warning. She trusted everyone around her. Kingsley, Vanessa, Jason. She never imagined that the people closest to her would become the source of her greatest heartbreak. A few weeks later, Sandra visited Kingsley's mansion again. Vanessa accompanied her. While Sandra stepped outside to answer a phone call, Vanessa noticed one of Kingsley's business cards lying on a table. She picked it up, looked at the number, and smiled. An idea had already formed in her mind. That night, she sent Kingsley a message. At first, the conversation seemed harmless. Then it became personal. Soon they were talking almost every day. Whenever Kingsley complained about Sandra, Vanessa listened carefully. Whenever he felt frustrated, Vanessa comforted him. She told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Somewhere along the way, admiration turned into envy. Vanessa stopped looking at Sandra as a friend. She started looking at her as competition. She wanted Sandra's place. She wanted Sandra's life. And little by little, she began moving closer to Kingsley. Then one night, she sent a message that changed everything. A man like you deserves a woman who understands him. Kingsley replied immediately. From that moment, boundaries disappeared. The messages became phone calls. The phone calls became meetings. And the meetings became a secret relationship. All while Sandra remained completely unaware. Months passed. Sandra noticed changes. Kingsley became distant. He called less often, texted less often, and seemed less interested whenever they spent time together. Whenever Sandra asked questions, Kingsley blamed work, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One afternoon, she decided to surprise him. Without calling first, she drove straight to his mansion. The security guards welcomed her inside. As she approached Kingsley's bedroom, she heard laughter, a woman's laughter. The voice sounded familiar, very familiar. Sandra pushed the door open, then froze. Vanessa looked far too comfortable in a place she had no business being. Kingsley stood beside her. The room became silent. Nobody needed to explain anything. The betrayal was written all over their faces. For several seconds, Sandra simply stared at them. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was no explanation that could fix what Sandra had just seen. Then Sandra noticed someone else. Standing quietly near the balcony was Jason. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who knew far more than he wanted to admit. Without saying a word, Sandra turned around and walked away. That day, she lost both her boyfriend and her best friend forever. A few weeks later, Kingsley officially ended his relationship with Sandra. Shortly afterward, he introduced Vanessa as his new girlfriend. Many people were shocked. Others quietly criticized her. But Vanessa didn't care. In her mind, she had won. The day Vanessa married Kingsley, she felt like she had finally defeated life. The mansion was hers. The expensive gifts were hers. The wealthy husband was hers. Everything she once admired from a distance now belonged to her. As she smiled for photographs and celebrated with family and friends, she believed she had achieved everything she wanted. Soon, she became pregnant. Then came another child. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect family. A successful husband, a beautiful wife, happy children. But appearances can be deceiving. Because while Vanessa believed she had reached the happiest chapter of her life, a painful truth was already waiting for her. As the years passed, Vanessa began noticing things she couldn't explain. Kingsley spent an unusual amount of time with Jason. At first, she ignored it. After all, they had always been close. But over time, the friendship became impossible to ignore. Kingsley called Jason constantly, bought him expensive gifts, paid his bills, purchased a car for him, and even invested money into his business. Meanwhile, Vanessa often had to argue before Kingsley would spend money on his own household. Whenever she complained, Kingsley became defensive. Jason is my friend. Stop creating problems. Sometimes, Vanessa would wake up in the middle of the night and discover Kingsley talking quietly on the phone. Every time she asked who it was, the answer was always the same. Jason, Jason, Jason. Eventually, she stopped asking questions, but the discomfort never disappeared. Something wasn't right, and deep down, she knew it. The problem was that she wasn't ready to face the truth. The arguments became worse. Almost every conversation ended in a fight. Vanessa was tired. Tired of begging for attention, tired of begging for support, tired of watching Jason receive more care than her own family. Meanwhile, Jason had become a regular visitor in their home. Sometimes he stayed for hours, other times he spent entire weekends there. Kingsley even prepared a comfortable guest room for him. One evening, another argument broke out. Vanessa accused Kingsley of neglecting his family. Kingsley accused her of being ungrateful. The fight became so heated that Kingsley stormed out of their bedroom. A few minutes later, Vanessa heard the guest room door close. She knew exactly where he had gone. Hours passed. Night came. The house became quiet. Then Vanessa suddenly realized Kingsley had not returned. Thinking he had fallen asleep after the argument, she decided to call him. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Frustrated, she walked toward the guest room. The door wasn't completely closed. A small gap remained open. Vanessa pushed it gently and froze. Through the partially opened door, Vanessa saw Kingsley and Jason together, in a way no wife should ever have to witness. For several seconds, she couldn't move, she couldn't speak, she couldn't even think. Suddenly, everything made sense. The arguments, the distance, the lies, the excuses, the gifts, the late-night phone calls, the way Kingsley always defended Jason. Everything finally made sense. And for the first time since marrying him, Vanessa realized something terrifying. She never truly knew the man she fought so hard to have. The marriage never recovered. The arguments continued. The distance grew worse. Kingsley barely paid attention to his family, yet he continued spending freely on Jason. Eventually, Vanessa could no longer endure it. One day, she packed her belongings and left. This time, Kingsley made no effort to stop her. He didn't call. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask her to stay. For the first time in years, Vanessa finally understood the pain she had caused. She had sacrificed a genuine friendship for a life she thought would make her happy. But happiness never came. Months later, she tried reaching out to Sandra. No response. She tried again. Still nothing. Eventually, she stopped trying. Because some betrayals leave wounds that apologies cannot heal. And as Vanessa sat alone, reflecting on the choices that brought her there, one painful truth became impossible to ignore. She spent years wanting Sandra's life, only to discover that she never really knew the man at the center of it all.